We're going to be looking at a long section in the book of Joshua today. Don't worry, I'm not going to read it all. I'm actually going to read very little of it. It's a lot of text, and I spent a lot of time this week reading about very particular geographic details in the land of Israel and, the land that once was all Israel. And we're not going to be reading a lot of that geography today. There's too much of it to go through. And we might think when we look at passages that are long lists or details that we don't have any idea what these mean, we don't know where these places are, we don't know what the significance is, it's very natural to wonder, what in the world does this have to do with me? How is this God's word for me? And one of the things I hope you'll think about when you come to passages like this again in the future and today is to think about what this meant to them, the fact that they were being given land, a place to live. This was, as we'll see, they believed the answer to and the fulfillment of a God's ancient promise to Abraham. But also to say, what did they make of it? Were they happy with it? Were they content with it? What did they have to do with it? Because I think this opens up to us a similar kind of question when we think about our own situation in life. And the question, how do you feel about the lot you've been given in life? If you think not just about the parcel of land that you may live on, if you own your own land, but also your situation in life. Because most of us, or at least many of us, might think about this from time to time. If you're young, you might think about the hand you feel like you've been dealt in life. Do you feel grateful? Do you feel like you've been given challenges that maybe others haven't? How do you feel about that? It's commonplace for people who are in the middle of their lives to have what's called a midlife crisis, where they assess what they have in life, whether by their choice or by their circumstances, and to ask, is this what I want out of my life? Do I need to make a change? And for people who are later in life, maybe not only looking back, but also looking forward and thinking, are there things that I still want to see in my life? Do I have regrets? What am I grateful for? And sometimes, if people feel like they have more to complain about than to give thanks than that they are, they may start to look around and say, what can I do differently? This can be positive or negative depending on the situation, but it's very easy for people to start to say, hey, that situation that other person has, I wish I had that, right? Maybe that really would be better for me. When we think about the idea of a land of promise, and if you think about it in terms of not just a physical place, but of your general situation in life, ask yourself, what does the promised land mean to you? Is it something that you think back in your life, you're like, oh, this part of my life, when I was a teenager in my glory days, or when I was raising my kids, if you have kids, or, when I had this high point, or right now, maybe. This was great. Or maybe it's something you're still looking forward to. When I retire, or when my ship comes in, or whatever it is, right? Something that you're hoping for in this, or maybe you're thinking beyond this life. And that's what you're aiming for. When we turn to the book of Joshua, we looked at recently that you come to the place in the book where you're told the land had rest from war. The conflicts, which by the way, there's not a real timeline given, so there may be at least, we have an indication in one of the passages today that it may have been at least a 5-year sort of time period. But there comes to the point where the conflicts have abated and Israel receives the inheritance that they understood God had promised them long ago. Up to this point, they'd been a nomadic, a wandering people, a people without a home, without a place in the world. and now they will have a place. They look back to the promise in Genesis 17:8 that God gave to Abraham. I will give to you and to your offspring after you the land where you are now an alien, the land of Canaan, for a perpetual holding, and I will be their God. So this passage begins in chapter 13. Now Joshua was old. He emphasizes he was really old, right? He's not going to be here maybe that much longer, and it's time for things to get settled before he ends his life here. And the Lord said to him, "You are old and advanced in years," just what everybody hopes God will tell them, "and very much of the land still remains to be possessed. Only allot the land to Israel for an inheritance, as I have commanded you. Now therefore divide this land for an inheritance to the 9 tribes and the half-tribe of Manasseh." So there's this emphasis that much of the land still remains to be possessed. We're not going to read all the passages through these chapters, but there's a number of places where it emphasizes that there are other peoples living in and around Israel at this time as well, even after all the events of the first 12 chapters. And then, but that it's imperative that they portion out the land. The reference to 9.5 tribes of Manasseh is a reminder that 2.5 tribes, that the other half of Manasseh, as well as Reuben and Gad, were given territories on the other side of the Jordan River, the east of the Jordan River, in what is today modern-day Jordan, I believe. I think it's all in that area. Yes, it says it here a little bit down. It says, "With the other half-tribe of Manasseh, the Reubenites and the Gadites received their inheritance, which Moses gave them beyond the Jordan eastward. To the tribe of Levi alone Moses gave no inheritance. The offerings by fire to the Lord God of Israel are their inheritance, as he said to them." We're going to talk a little more next week about the role of the tribe of Levi and what that meant and what it means for us. We'll talk about that next week. But there's a sense in which the tribe of Levi's relationship to God and representing God to the people meant that they wouldn't be given a regular portion of the land the way the other tribes would. But for the other tribes, it's being parceled out, and the first tribe that receives its allotment in Joshua is the tribe of Judah. We're not going to look at all of that, but there is one interesting little story about the part in that Caleb gets. Now, Caleb had been Judah's representative when Moses had sent 12 spies into the land many years before. Joshua had also been one of those 12, representing the tribe. Said, "Yeah, it's great, let's go forward." The others had all said, "These people are huge, we're terrified, we look like grasshoppers compared to them, let's not do it." So a lot of time has passed since then. It says, "Then the people of Judah came to Joshua at Gilgal, and Caleb the son of Jephunneh the Kenizzite said to him, 'You know that the Lord said to Moses the man of God in Kadesh Barnea concerning you and me. I was only 40 years old when Moses the servant of the Lord sent me from Kadesh Barnea to spy out the land, and I brought an honest report. But my companions who went up with me made the heart of the people melt. Yet I wholeheartedly followed the Lord my God. And now," I'm skipping a little bit, but this is the gist of it. "Now, here I am today, 85 years old, and I am still as strong today as I was on the day that Moses sent me." Maybe he wasn't really in shape as a 40-year-old, but this is impressive, right? "So now, give me this hill country of which the Lord spoke on that day, for you heard on that day how the Anakim were there, these giants, with great fortified cities. It may be that the Lord will be with me, and I shall drive them out as the Lord had said." There's a way here that things are coming full circle. Caleb's had to wait 45 years to put to the test what the Lord said. He said 45 years ago, "We can do it." And now here he is saying, "We can still do it, and I'm gonna do it." Caleb is grateful to receive the land that he's been promised. You notice he could complain that it's too hard, just as people had many years before, that there are giants there. He could also say, I'm too old now. I can't do it. But he doesn't say either of those things. Even though the land is a challenge, even though he's old, he's grateful for the portion he has, the portion that he's been promised. But not everybody in Israel is really excited with what they've given, where the lines fall for them. And we see one example of this in the tribe of Joseph, that is Manasseh and Ephraim together. The tribe of Joseph spoke to Joshua, saying, Why have you given me but one lot and portion as an inheritance, since we are a numerous people, whom all along the Lord has blessed? And Joshua said to them, If you are a numerous people, go up to the forest and clear ground for yourselves in the land of the Perizzites and the Rephaim, since the hill country of Ephraim is too narrow for you. Now there's a couple things to note here. One is if you look at a map, and your Bible might have a map of the way that the 12 tribes were divided, you'll notice that actually compared to a lot of the other tribes, Ephraim and Manasseh have a lot of land. So they're starting out already with a big chunk, and they get it portioned out to them before some of the other tribes do. Before this, some of the other tribes at this point still haven't received their allotment. And still they're saying, it's not enough for us. It's not enough for us. But notice what Joshua says. He doesn't say, oh, well, I'll try to find you something else. He says, well, if it's not enough for you because there's a whole bunch of you, get to work. Right? There's land to be cleared, land to be cultivated in your territory. Just because you're looking for easy pickings somewhere else isn't an excuse not to take advantage of what you've been given. But it's going to take some effort. And then the tribe of Joseph said, the hill country isn't enough for us. Yet all the Canaanites who live in the plain have chariots of iron, both those in Bethshan and its villages and those in the valley of Jezreel. Then Joshua said, you are indeed a numerous people and have great power. You shall drive out the Canaanites, though they have chariots of iron and though they are strong. So they say, okay, well, it's not just that we haven't cleared the forest. There's also these lowlands, and we can't go there because the people who are our enemies, they're too strong there. Now you may remember in chapter 11, Israel was attacked, or they were going to be attacked by an army with chariots, right? And Israel was victorious. So it's interesting that even after that, the Josephites are saying, and Joshua says, I'm not going to take that as an excuse. Now, in the next chapter, the remaining tribes begin to get their allotments. Then the whole congregation of Israelites assembled at Shiloh and set up the tent of the meeting there. So this is a signal that God is being worshipped there. This is a place where this decision is going to be made in the presence of God. The land lay subdued before them. There remained among the Israelites 7 tribes whose inheritance had not yet been apportioned. So Joshua said to the Israelites, how long will you be slack about going in and taking possession of the land that the Lord, the God of your ancestors, has given you? Now, this is probably not so much an indictment of them as it is a motivational, sort of a pep talk to say, it's time, let's get going. So the men went, there's a little bit down, the men went and traversed the land and set down in a book a description of it by towns in 7 divisions. Then they came back to Joshua in the camp at Shiloh, and Joshua cast lots for them in Shiloh before the Lord. And there Joshua apportioned the land to the Israelites, to each a portion. So they had this process. They agreed that this was the way they were going to do it. They received their lots, each of these other tribes. Now the last one, I think, to receive a tribe is the tribe of Dan. And there's an interesting note about what happens with Dan. It says, when the territory of the Danites was lost to them, So they're given this territory, their inheritance, but it's lost to them. The Danites went up and fought against Leshem, and after capturing it and putting it to the sword, they took possession of it and settled in it, calling Leshem Dan after their ancestor Dan. And this is a picture up above of some of the front of the ancient city of Dan in northern Israel, up near Lebanon. So what's interesting here, we've talked in other times about the warfare, and again, the way that they're going about this is not a model for us. But what's interesting is they're given this portion, they lose it because it's too difficult to possess, and they move to the northern part. There doesn't seem to be any kind of, in the text, any kind of condemnation of them doing this. There's sort of a this is the way it was kind of sense. It's kind of interesting, right? That it didn't work. By the way, actually, there is a place in Israel today called the Dan Block, which is the most populous part of Israel. It's where Tel Aviv is. It's the Tel Aviv metropolitan area. And it's not where the Danites moved to, it's where their original possession was. So just a curious sort of piece there. When they had finished distributing the several territories of the land as inheritances, the Israelites gave an inheritance among them to Joshua son of Nun. By command of the Lord, they gave him the town that he asked for, Timnath-Serah in the hill country of Ephraim. He rebuilt the town and settled in it. So Caleb and Joshua both get their own allotments. It's at the beginning and the end. It kind of frames the giving of allotments. One of the things that's interesting here, though, is that Joshua, who is the leader, waits until the very end of all the allotments to receive his allotment. He doesn't say, I'm the boss, I get first pick. He waits till everyone else is settled and then receives a portion. We might wonder, why do we get all these details? Why are there 7 chapters in the book of Joshua, right? If you're doing daily reading through Joshua, it's going to take you a week, right? A chapter apiece to get through this passage, and by the end of it, you're going to think, there's so much detail, I don't understand what all this is. What's the purpose of all of this? This, by the way, is a picture from the top of Mount Tabor in the northern part of Israel, looking out. I think that's the Jezreel Valley. A lot of agricultural area today. But all of this detail was immensely practical to these early readers and hearers of this passage, because clearly laying out these borders, one virtue of this is that it meant that they wouldn't fight over their borders. They have it written out right there. This is where the border is. Don't argue with one another about where the lines are drawn. It's all laid out. There's also a sense in which having all of this laid out one after the other, all together, communicates to all of these separate tribes, which now could plausibly go their own ways. They could fragment. But it reminds them that it gives them a national identity, and it's centered on their common worship of the God who gave this to them. And then, because they believe God gave it to them, it would signal to them that God has been faithful, and should remind us of this as well, that God is faithful to keep to fulfill what he has promised. But this often leads to the question in our time, what does this actually mean about who owns the land? Who owned it then? Who owns it now? Because, of course, the land is contested now just as it was then. And, how do we feel about the fact there are other people living there? Is that good? Is that bad? Are we indifferent to that? This is another picture. This is in the southern part of Israel from the slopes of a man-made mountain, the Herodium, which Herod built to be a fortress and a tomb for himself. But it's looking south into the Judean hills, which today is part of the West Bank here. And in the center, you can't see it very well maybe, but is the town of Tekoa, the home of the ancient Old Testament prophet Amos. What's interesting today is that Tekoa is a Jewish settlement within the West Bank. Obviously, that phenomenon is very controversial. If we go back to the Old Testament, the principle is that the land ultimately belongs to God. The land shall not be sold in perpetuity, for the land is mine. With me you are but aliens and tenants. This is from Leviticus in the Jubilee laws. Notice here, and similarly in Joshua, we see God giving the land to the Israelites, giving them their portions. But if we think about the Israelites not as owners but as tenants, then tenants who are placed in the land can also be removed from the land. And in fact, this is what Deuteronomy says will happen if the people are disobedient. But if you will not obey the Lord, one of the consequences will be, you shall be plucked off the land you are entering to possess. The Lord will scatter you among the peoples from one end of the earth to the other. And of course, this happens more than once. There's an interesting parallel in Jesus' parable, what's often called the parable of the wicked tenants. Jesus says at the end of it, "What then will the owner of the vineyard do? He will come and destroy the tenants." Think of this as, you can spiritualize this, and you can think about this as kind of a spiritual consequence, but you may also think about it in terms of the land and what happens in the land of Israel in the first century, especially with the Roman destruction of Jerusalem and the temple in 70 A.D. And in some ways, this parallels the way the book of Joshua portrays what happens to the Canaanites. That is, it's not just that if the Canaanites were opposed to God and they ended up losing a lot of the land, but also there were various times when the Israelites reject God in one way or another, and the consequence is they end up losing the land. Now, the way this happens is very different in the New Testament than it is in Joshua. In Joshua, we've seen this again and again. The Canaanites who choose war with Israel and also with God inevitably lose their land, while the inhabitants who acknowledge the Lord, welcome Israel, remain in the land. The issue wasn't that, and I think this is important to know as well, the issue wasn't that there wasn't room enough for both of them in the land. As with the tribe of Joseph, the issue was the land just needed to be cultivated. The number of people living in the land at that time was very small, particularly by modern standards. We might be talking about like less than 50,000 people in the hill country. So it's not that it's overcrowded and it's one or the other. The question is, will they come into conflict with one another or not, and how can there be peace? What about today? Does this story affect the way we think about and the way we view both the Jewish and the Palestinian populations in the land of Israel? We might ask here, is it all rightfully Jewish land by virtue of an ancient divine land grant? Is that the way we understand the promise to Abraham and the book of Joshua as a perpetual holding? Is every way, another connected question, is every way that the land has come into Jewish hands legitimate? Some people would say yes. Doesn't matter what way, it's all legitimate. Then is every way illegitimate? There are some people who would say that every way it has is illegitimate, right? There are extreme views on this question. And the history of the land, both in ancient times, land of Canaan, the land of Israel, sometimes also called, but if we take the time to understand how the situation has developed, it can help us to understand the hopes and motivations of the peoples there. By the way, if you're interested, I'm assuming it's still on Christianity Today's website. A couple of years ago, just shortly after the beginning of the conflict there between Israel and Hamas, there was a podcast done called Promised Land, done by Mike Cosper and others, that digs into some of the roots of what's going on over there. If you're interested in a little bit of a deeper dive, I'd commend that to you. It's like 6 one-hour sessions. It's called Promised Land. But the question is, and the question continues to be, is it possible for the people who live in the land to live in peace? And as Christians, the question we should ask is, how do we, as Christians, how do we evaluate the conduct of various people on both sides of this issue? Because the question isn't about how do we pick our team. Sometimes people think about that just as they think about that in terms of U.S. politics. But just as in U.S. politics, you shouldn't think, oh, well, my team is always right, the other team's always wrong, right? That's not necessarily a helpful way of dialoguing or moving forward. How as Christians do we respond to both the conduct and the difficulties of peoples on both sides of the conflict? In the Old Testament, we see that the relationship of the people of Israel to the land is a major theme. But in the New Testament, the idea of the land of promise has been refocused. And this is where we're starting to get to how does this apply to us. In fact, in Romans 4, we've seen this verse before, for the promise that he would inherit the world did not come to Abraham or to his descendants through the law, but through the righteousness of faith. Paul is saying this land grant, the land of Israel, is actually sort of like a down payment or a symbol of something much larger that God is doing, that ultimately it's the world itself that is the inheritance. And a little bit further down, for this reason it depends on faith, in order that the promise may rest on grace and be guaranteed to all his descendants, not only to the adherents of the law, but also to those who share the faith of Abraham. So Paul is saying that, hey, if you're a Gentile Christian, if you're a non-Jewish Christian, you are also an heir to this promise, right? This is a much bigger vision of what's happening here. And Hebrews, interestingly, even in reflecting on Abraham's situation, says that even Abraham did not see for himself personally the payoff being the land. By faith, Abraham obeyed when he was called to set out for a place that he was to receive as an inheritance. By faith, he stayed for a time in the land he had been promised, as in a foreign land living in tents, for he looked forward to the city that has foundations, whose architect and builder is God. By the way, this is not talking about Jerusalem on earth. This is talking about the New Jerusalem. Seems to be. So what about us? What about us? We'll end with it here. We should ask, how does this apply to us? What is our promised land? When we think about what we're waiting to receive, the inheritance from God, what is it that we're waiting for? What have we already received? And are we content with where the borders have been drawn for us? Now, maybe we're not completely content. Maybe the problem, like with the tribes of Joseph, is that we haven't done our part to take advantage of what we've been given. Maybe we haven't cleared the forest. Maybe we haven't faced up to our challenges. Maybe we've said, they're too big, it's too hard, we want something easier. And then I think one other takeaway, finally, in this passage is the question, are we willing to be as patient to receive it? Do we trust God enough to wait and to be patient, to do what is right and to be faithful as we wait, knowing that God will deliver all that he's promised? Are we as patient as Caleb was, waiting those 45 years for his opportunity? Are we as patient as Joshua was, waiting for everybody else to get their land first and not saying, I'm the boss, I get to take it, but saying, here, you take what God has offered. My time will come. Let's go to the Lord in prayer.